Hey everyone, it's Abby Alexander reporting for Swift Fox Media, and I'm here in the press file room of the Pittsburgh Public Education Forum.
The reason why where you live and the zip code you're in defines the education, as you were saying, is that's your parents live where they can afford to live. And when you can afford to buy $1 million house, your problem is solved. For everybody else in America, your chances of getting into college if you're poor are roughly 9 in 100. You know, the system we have today, when you got one group of kids who, through no fault of their own, have no access to preschool, and another group has access to preschool, equals not equal. And when you got one group who, through no fault of their own, have terrible K-12 schools, and another, because of where their parents live, have good schools, equals not equal. And this is happening every day of every hour of every day and every week. One group of kids has college counselors and after-school sports and summer jobs, and the other group of kids has nothing. Equal is not equal, and equal is not equal, and yet we live in a country where more money goes to the wealthy kids than it does to the poor kids in the United States of America. If you want to close the achievement gap, we have to do the opposite of that. And I'm the only politician in this race that's saying that.
So Senator Michael Bennet just finished speaking with the press, and I'm about to have a short interview with him. With climate inaction and school shootings, the current impeachment process, it's very easy for my peers and I to feel hopeless about our futures and our government. What's your message to our generation?
Okay, I want to be very clear about this. I talked to a university president recently who said to me that the kids on her campus hated politics and they hated politicians. And I know a lot of politicians. I don't like some of the politicians. Mm-hmm. But then I asked her, I said, what was it like when you were in school? And she was in school in the late 60s, and that was during the height of the Vietnam War. And she said, we thought our country needed us to survive. We thought the country would not survive without us. That's what I believe. I don't think there's a lot of reason for kids to feel inspired about our current politics, but the reality is we aren't going to survive as a democracy unless you guys get involved. There's so many things you can point to, the guns you talked about, the climate change, the fact that we have a president who doesn't seem to believe in the democracy itself, the fact that you've got some of you have to borrow all this money for the privilege of getting a college degree. The fact that we're not investing in infrastructure that means it's going to be more expensive when you get there. All of that stuff is a reason for you to be really mad at me. And maybe that's what should inspire you, is, I don't mean literally at me, but at my generation. And what I would say is that you have an incredible role to play, because turnout in these elections means everything. And if your generation turns out, or the people that are eligible to vote turn out in the numbers that other generations turn out, we'll be able to change America, and you're going to inherit a place that you're going to feel better about, and that's why you should be involved. Democracy is not a spectator sport, and if we stay on the sidelines, it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy that the stuff that you would like to get done never actually gets done. Climate, the most important one of all of those. So it's a great question. Please get involved.
Will do.
All right.
Thank you very much.
Thank you
nice
for saying hello.
Meet you.
Most countries, if you got an area where students are at a disadvantage, where they're historically excluded, or where they're just low income, they would get more funding per pupil. One of the only countries where not only is that not the case, but so often, as you describe, it's less. And this is not just a question of economic fairness, it is a question of basic racial justice. And this is why we need to use the mechanisms of Title I, federal funding that I am proposing we triple, in order to make sure that more resources can go out, and partner with states with carrots and sticks to press them to make sure that their funding formulas actually benefit those who most need the funding. And when you have property taxes as the main source of funding for education systems, as it is in so many parts of this country, poor kids are being punished for being poor. And, again, there is the racial inequality that threatens to drag down the entire country. Not only for those who are discriminated against because of the color of their skin, but the entire nation. will not achieve its potential so long as these inequities persist. Part of it that doesn't get talked about enough is a result of just how the boundaries of districts are drawn. And it's why I am proposing that we have a pre-clearance process, as we had to have with the Voting Rights Act, when there are major district boundary changes proposed. Otherwise, a school district may be able to say, look at us, we're integrated, we're good to go, only to turn around and realize that when you look at the bigger region or the community or the county or whatever it is, it remains segregated by race, and separate has never, ever meant equal.
Mayor Pete Buttigieg just finished up speaking at the forum, and he's about to come in and answer a few press questions. Hi, my name is Abby Alexander. I'm a senior at Fox Chapel Area High School. With climate inaction, school shootings, and the current impeachment process, it's really easy for my peers and I to feel hopeless about our government and our futures. What's your message to our generation as students and as voters in the 2020 election?
Well, here's the good news, is that the power is with young people right now, both as voters and young people not yet even old enough to vote, who are changing the conversation on issues like climate. As we've seen with the person of the year, not even somebody who would be a voting age, were she a U.S. citizen. As we've seen on issues like gun violence, where you've seen parents and grandparents at the side of students often taking to the streets demanding change. And I believe that that is part of what's going to change the outcomes on so many of these issues. So the most important message for students to hear and for young people to hear is that they have more power than you might think. And that the longer you're planning to be here, the more you have at stake in issues from climate to the future of our country. And I welcome the participation and the energy of young people. And frankly, hopelessness is unaffordable because hopelessness is the enemy of action.
Mr. Mayor, and how do we make sure that we have enough teachers? Well, let's go to the part that's post-high school. What I can do with that same 2-cent wealth tax is that we can make all post-high school education, technical school, public apprenticeship programs, 2-year college and 4-year college, tuition free. That means anyone who wants to be a public school teacher or anything else will have the opportunity to get an education. I also would make an historic investment of $50 billion into our historically black colleges and universities and minority-serving institutions. Those places disproportionately provide our teachers for the next generation. And third, let's make it a little easier to be a public school teacher. That same 2 cents I will use to cancel student loan debt for 43 million Americans. We need to make teaching available, and we need to show it some real respect. And when I say respect, I don't mean a coffee mug that you buy someone at the holidays. I mean you pay them a salary, you pay them money so that they can afford to support their families and still be able to teach in public school.
The problem with testing is we end up as a nation and as an educational system spending too much time teaching for the tests. Okay? And we need, your point is well taken, we need to keep track of the individual progress that the kids are making. And if they're not making progress, let's deal with that. This is especially difficult, and I've talked to teachers about this, for kids who have disabilities, or kids maybe have just come into this country, can't even speak the language. And they are forced to take tests to get humiliated when they do very poorly on those tests. So there is no question that we have got to keep track of every kid in this country to make sure that he or she is reading, doing math well. But there are better ways to doing it than standardized testing, in my view. The better way is for schools to be determined in tracking each kid and paying attention to each kid, not providing a test for the entire school district.
If you're taking care of the most disadvantaged person in your society, you're probably doing a good job for everybody else too. So in my mind, when I look at a school system If we're taking care of the kids with disabilities, if we're taking care of the kids who are coming to school with the most disadvantages, that to me means that school system is probably succeeding for those kids and everybody else. And I would look at that very closely in terms of how schools are doing. And we're going to have to reorient our priorities, because right now, the corporations determine our priorities. And you can pretty easily look across this society and figure out why it is that we spend so much on drugs, and why it is we get ripped off in healthcare, and why it is we don't have reasonable gun safety laws, and why it is we've never dealt with the climate crisis ever at a federal level, and why teachers are mistreated and students are underrepresented. We are going to have to get back a government that's representing the people of the United States fairly. And until we do that, the corporations are going to continue to get exactly what they want, and they think of education as an expense for them through the tax line.
Mr. Tom Steyer just finished up speaking at the forum, and he's about to come in and speak with the press, and I plan on asking him the same questions I asked Senator Bennet and Mayor Pete Buttigieg. Mr. Steyer, I'm a high school senior, and with climate inaction...
Are you?
Yes.
Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you too. With climate inaction, school shootings, and the current impeachment process, it's very easy for my peers and I to feel hopeless in our futures in our government. What's your message to my generation as a student and as a voter in the 2020 election?
So let me say this. The person in this race who has made climate their #1 priority, and the only person in this race, is me. I have said that I will declare a state of emergency on day 1, that we will put justice at the heart of this. We will do this through environmental justice, go to those communities, black and brown communities, where you can't breathe the air or drink the water safely, but that I will use the emergency powers of the presidency to make this happen. We will use it to create millions of jobs. We will reimagine a positive America. We will rebuild and recreate this country as the moral force in the world, and that actually we're going to have to do this together. So when you ask me, how can I think positively about the future? We're going to do 2 things together. We're going to solve the climate crisis. We can do it, and we can do it in a really positive way that reimagines it. You can be part of recreating and reimagining a morally driven, positive America that's sustainable. We need to take back this government from these corporations. But if we do those 2 things, and I have 4 kids, and I have heard this from them, their friends, and other people their age around the country, your age. We are going to do this so that, in fact, we have a hopeful, positive way of thinking about the future together, and we're going to succeed. And that success is going to make your life and my life incredibly meaningful, incredibly positive. That's how we're going to justify our time on the earth in a great way. Okay? Promise.
Our teachers are literally put into all these different roles. They are the counselor, sometimes they're the school nurse. So what you do is you, yes, increase pay for teachers, and you increase support for our teachers. By the way, I do that by rolling back the estate tax exemption, raising it to where it was before. That, by the way, under Barack Obama, if you just go to that level, you bring in over $100 billion. Can you believe this? That could go into our schools. But when it comes to these ideas, here is what I would do. Mental health. 1 in 5 Americans struggle with mental health. 30% increase in suicide in our country in the last 15 years. 30% increase, with a major increase with students. I was in Wapello, Iowa, and I talked to a counselor there from a small school in a rural area. She said in one day, she'd had 4 kids, just that day, come up to her with thoughts of suicide.
We're going to triple the amount of money we spend on Title I schools, from $15 billion to $45 billion a year. Again.
And where's that $15 billion extra dollars coming from?
By taxing income and wealth the same way. And that would raise $200 billion, the capital gains anyway. I can lay out all the detail, but you're going to tell me I don't have time. Here's the really important thing. What that would do, it would allow 3 things to happen. 1, teachers to be paid competitive salaries, $60,000 a year. That's the first thing this Title I school would have to use it for, to equalize teachers' pay, to make them competitive, to get people into those schools to teach. Number 2, it would provide for every single 3, 4, and 5-year-old to go to school, not to daycare, school, school. And what every study has shown of the great universities of late is that that would increase by over 58% the prospect of that child, no matter what their background, if they start school when they're 3 years old, school, full day, they in fact have a more than 59% chance of succeeding all the way through and beyond high school. Thirdly, we have to bring in more people to help the teachers. Everyone, raise your hand if you're teaching a public school. Well, guess what? How many school psychologists do you have in your school? How many people do you have that are social workers? How many people? You inherit everything. And so what happens is there's now one school psychologist for every 1,507 students in school. That's ridiculous.
Thanks everyone for tuning into Swift Fox Media. If you want to see the entire public education forum, you can click this link, and don't forget to vote in the 2020 election.